Russian missile attack in Dnipro, Ukraine.
It's hard when patients wake up and realize they're alone and that their children, husband, wife, or parents are buried under the debris.
Also tonight, Nepal is in mourning after its deadliest airplane crash in decades.
It was really horrific to see the flames, and suddenly there was smoke all over the sky. The situation was really intense. I have not seen anything like this before.
And as authorities in Quebec investigate an industrial blast, members of the community fear for missing workers.
That's what's hard right now. It's the waiting time, because it has been 3 days from the explosion, and we're still waiting.
That's later, but first. Heartbreaking scenes are playing out in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, where rescue crews are searching for survivors of a Russian missile attack on an apartment building that killed at least 30 people. That number will most certainly rise, as many more are missing and believed to be buried under the wreckage. Our correspondent Chris Brown reports from the scene.
More than a day after the Russian missile obliterated more than 70 apartments in the Dnipro building, the hope of finding anyone alive is all but gone. Not only was the building pulverized, if anyone managed to survive, a night of freezing temperatures would make it hard to survive hypothermia. And yet, rescue crews tethered themselves together with ropes and ventured out onto shaky, crumbling floors to see if anyone remained inside. Watching from the street was Ola, a doctor who told us she can't find her friends, but they were in the building. I don't know where they are, but I'm waiting, she says. Blood-curdling screams initially led rescuers to victims, and then there was hope there might be pockets of life in the building's basement. Workers would silence their heavy equipment and listen for cries for help and then push onwards. One woman was pulled out after 18 hours, but she was the last. Ukrainian officials say the missile that did such damage was fired by a Russian heavy bomber, and it was initially designed to destroy NATO ships. Russia fired a similar missile at a shopping mall in Kremenchuk in the summer, which killed 20 people. Dnipro's mayor told local media he believes the Russians were aiming at a thermal generating station several kilometers away, but the notoriously inaccurate missile missed. Our CBC crew was allowed to visit a Dnipro intensive care ward to meet survivors and talk to doctors. One, Dr. Irina, told us the worst thing is telling patients that their whole family is likely dead. It's hard when patients wake up and realize they're alone, that their children, husband, wife, or parents are buried under the debris. We also met Ole Valove. He was in his fourth-floor apartment when the missile hit. He says his entire body was pierced by flying glass. In the hospital, he was bloodied and bruised with cuts all over his face. I wanted to talk to you, he told us, because Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is a world leader who's mobilized support for our country, and I don't want world support for Ukraine to weaken. This is one of the deadliest attacks on Ukrainian civilians since Russia's invasion began 11 months ago. The power is out here and it's cold, but those watching from the street say they're determined not to let heartbreaking moments like this defeat them. Chris Brown, CBC News, Dnipro.
As the rescue effort continues in Dnipro, Ukrainian forces continue to call for more weapons. As David Thurton reports, Canada and its allies are responding.
A large metal box fires a missile from the ground, one capable of intercepting enemy rockets. This is the type of defense system Ukraine has been asking its Western allies to provide, and this is the one Ottawa will be buying for Ukraine.
We are working to get it there as soon as possible. We are not contemplating years at this point.
Defense Minister Anita Anand not saying when the National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems will arrive in Ukraine, but notes Canada will be buying them from the U.S. at a cost of more than $400 million.
We do value this support.
Ukraine's ambassador to Canada, Yulia Kovalev, said on CBC's Rosemary Barton Live, Western countries are finally responding to her country's calls for offensive weapons, calls Kyiv has been making since the beginning of the war.
Because a lot of the weapons that we has been asking since February 24.
Kovalev says the last 11 months have shown Ukrainian fighters have what it takes to succeed, making do with what equipment it has and was sent. Now, she says, what Ukraine needs are hundreds of Western infantry fighting vehicles and tanks. The U.S. is sending its Bradley fighting vehicle. Britain promised yesterday 14 Challenger 2 tanks. Equipment needed, defense experts say, as the war shifts from a holding pattern to a new offensive in the spring, taking back territory Moscow has seized.
It will bring the Ukrainians closer to the front line.
Michael Bossacu is a global affairs analyst and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. While the Challenger 2 tanks are a nice gesture, he notes Ukraine needs hundreds of Western tanks. Bossacu speculates Britain's move will put pressure on others.
But also it sends a diplomatic message to European countries. Now is the time to grow some spine, give Ukraine more muscle in the form of tanks and fighting vehicles.
That pressure will be on Germany as Western defense leaders gather for meetings this week. Several European countries want to send their German-made Leopard tanks, but Berlin has so far refused to grant re-export permits, fearing flooding Ukraine with tanks could further escalate the war with Russia. David Thurton, CBC News, Ottawa.
Nepal has declared a national day of mourning after its deadliest plane crash in 30 years. At least 68 of the 72 people aboard the Yeti Airlines flight died when it came in for a landing in a tourist town. The government is pledging a full investigation into what caused the disaster. Philip Lishanok reports.
Video shared on social media appears to show Yeti Airlines Flight 691, which took off from the capital Kathmandu, on approach to land in Pokhara, a city in central Nepal. From her rooftop terrace, Divya Dakal watched as it came in over her neighborhood.
And then it just disappeared, and suddenly there was smoke all over the sky.
She and her father rushed to the crash site in the Seti River Gorge, just east of the city. Dakal posted video of the rescue operations.
It was really horrific to see. The flames were still going on, and then all the army personnel going down to rescue the bodies, and the bodies were covered up in bags.
Authorities say 53 of the passengers were Nepalese, but Indian, Russian, and South Korean nationals were also on board, as well as people from Ireland, Australia, and France. Global Affairs says there were no Canadian passengers on the plane. Nepal's Prime Minister Pushpa Kamal Dahal says he's deployed armed forces for recovery operations.
The investigation is ongoing, and I have called an emergency cabinet meeting.
Nepal is one of the most challenging areas in the world in which to fly.
Aviation expert John Cox is a former pilot and crash investigator based in Florida. He says the country has one of the worst flight safety records in the world.
They do experience accidents in Nepal with some frequency, and it's due to the terrain. This airline is banned from flying in the European Union.
Cox says there are reports that the runway where the Yeti aircraft was attempting to land had not been used before. The airport in Pokhara was recently built and had just opened weeks ago in hopes of encouraging more tourists to visit the region. Philip Lishanok, CBC News, Toronto.
Peru has extended a state of emergency in the capital Lima and 2 other regions for 30 days in response to ongoing anti-government protests. Demonstrators clashed with police as the decree for the extension was signed late last night. Peru first announced a state of emergency in mid-December, giving security forces special powers to limit freedoms, including the right to assembly. Protesters are calling for interim President Dina Boluarte to step down.
No puedo dejar de reiterar mi pesar por las muertes de peruanas y peruanos en los actos de protesta.
Boluarte apologized for the deaths of at least 40 people as a result of the protests in a televised address on Friday, but she made it clear she will not resign. She's a hypocrite, says protester Tanya Serra. Boluarte says sorry, but doesn't come out to talk. She sends the police and the military to go kill, Serra says. Many of the demonstrators are supporters of former President Pedro Castillo. Castillo was impeached last month after attempting to suspend Congress. He's being detained on rebellion charges for 18 months. U.S. President Joe Biden's political headache is growing. Yesterday, more classified documents were unearthed at his Delaware home. It's the apparent mishandling of files he previously criticized Donald Trump for. J.P. Tasker takes us through the latest discovery and the implications for Biden.
A celebratory scene in Atlanta as President Joe Biden marks Martin Luther King Jr. Day. But he doesn't have much to clap about. There's a scandal brewing back in Washington. Another day, another top-secret document has been found at the president's home in Wilmington, Delaware. The White House lawyer discovered 5 more classified documents near the president's garage.
My Corvette's in a locked garage, okay? So it's not like you're sitting out in the street.
More than 20 highly classified documents have been uncovered so far. Some of them were found before the November midterm election. They were never publicly disclosed.
This is a serious matter.
Robert Fisk is a former advisor to President Barack Obama.
The most immediate challenge for the Biden administration is to get their arms around this.
Fisk says the drip, drip, drip of new documents could be politically damaging and derail Biden's agenda.
People will forgive a stumble, but they won't forgive 4 and 5 stumbles.
Some of the classified material dates back to his time as vice president, and they're stamped with SCI, or Sensitive Compartmentalized Information, a mark only used for highly classified data obtained from intelligence sources. Reports suggest they include details about Iran, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom.
We've seen the breaking news.
The White House hasn't yet provided an explanation for how or why the documents wound up in Biden's hands as a private citizen before he became president.
He did not know that the records were there when they were found. He does not know what's in them.
Just shows the hypocrisy in
the president's Republican adversaries have already pounced. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy.
What's real concerning to me is how justice is applied, and is it applied equally? Why do you raid President Trump? His wasn't just lock, was padlock.
2 very different presidents, each facing a similar investigation over misplaced documents. The difference, Democrats say, is that Biden is cooperating with authorities. Trump, meanwhile, is facing possible obstruction of justice charges. J.P. Tasker, CBC News, Ottawa.
California is bracing for another round of heavy rain, wind, and snow. Unrelenting atmospheric rivers have been hitting there since late last month. Despite that, the state's severe drought is far from over. Susanna De Silva looks at how farmers are trying to hold on to that rain.
This was a natural depression that, we enhanced it, deepened it.
Amongst the rows of muddy farmland appears a 3-acre pit or basin filled with water, unassumingly replenishing the most vital and politically charged resource they have here in the rolling hills of the Pajaro Valley near Santa Cruz.
So this recharge basin is basically supplying the irrigation that we need to farm this ranch sustainably.
Dennis LeBeau is in charge of land and water resources for Reuters affiliated companies, the largest berry producers in the world.
It's never been more challenging to be a farmer in California than the last 5 years.
Water shortages and new state conservation regulations have prompted new ideas. A meter counts all the water they pump out of the ground to use on the farm, but now the water that sinks down and replenishes the water table from the basin also gets measured, and they get a rebate. It's estimated 94 trillion liters of water has fallen over California in recent weeks. Millions of people remain under flood watches, yet much of that water has just returned to the ocean. And while in a better position than before, the vast majority of the state is still in a moderate or extreme drought, a state that supplies about 20% of the crops Canadians rely on.
I think it's always been complicated. It's adding new complications.
Jay Lund is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at UC Davis. He says California has always cycled between droughts and floods, but he says climate change is making each one more extreme, and California has to adjust.
We might see a 10%, 15% reduction in irrigated land, probably on the order of 500,000 to 1 million acres less of irrigated farmland.
Until then, the state says it is focusing on water conservation plus new ways of collecting it. But Carla Namath, the director of California's Department of Water Resources, says they are already making other plans.
We want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that manages the transition of land fallowing creates dust and air pollution challenges.
Back on the farm, Lebeau says they are working to meet the world's food demands, and while the basin has worked, it has also proven more expensive than they anticipated.
Poverty is not sustainable, so if we can't generate enough revenue and people can't pay enough for these products, business won't survive.
In the meantime, the valley will see more of these basins, hoping to prevent that day. Susana de Silva, CBC News, Santa Cruz, California.
A stringent new smoking ban is now in force in Mexico. As of today, smoking is illegal in all outdoor public places, including parks and beaches. Restaurants can no longer have smoking sections. Hotels are not allowed to offer smoking rooms. The law, which is considered one of the strictest anti-tobacco laws in the world, also includes a ban on tobacco advertising. In Saint-Roch-de-l'Achigan, Quebec, the community has come together after last week's propane facility explosion. 2 employees and a subcontractor are still missing after Thursday's blast. A special church service was held as the 3 families wait for news of their loved ones. Alison Northcott was there.
People filed solemnly out of the church in Saint-Roch-de-l'Achigan after a service to show support for the families affected by the explosion and fire last week. 3 people are still missing after the disaster at a propane distribution company that has touched many people in this tight-knit community.
I want to give a message for them.
Sylvie Auger says she's turned to her faith and is here to bring comfort to others.
They need to feel we are all together for them.
There were people in every pew in the church, among them members of the La Fortune family. Well known here, they own the business destroyed by the fire. Parish priest Claude Ritchie says those whose loved ones are missing need support.
We pray for them. We are with all our heart, all our soul.
Saint-Roch-de-l'Achigan restera toujours forte.
During the service, Mayor Sébastien Marcil said despite current hardships, the town will always remain strong, dignified, and united. After the service, he told reporters the families of the missing are enduring an unbearable wait for answers.
We're getting through this as a village, through solidarity, because you cannot imagine how hard it is to don't have news about person you love since 3 days.
The fire Thursday was powerful and dangerous.
À un moment donné, j'ai entendu « Sortez-moi de là ».
Eric Lizotte was close by, clearing snow from his truck when he saw the explosion. He ran to save someone he heard screaming for help but couldn't reach her.
C'est là que j'ai vu une partie du toit qui est descendue.
I saw part of the roof come down along with part of the wall right on top of her, he says. Then it went up in flames. That's when I had to move back. At the site today, police vehicles and yellow tape surround the business. Residents have been coming by to see the damage. Radio-Canada sources say Quebec provincial police are now considering a possible investigation into criminal negligence. The La Fortune family did not comment. Those at the church service say with so many people shaken by the tragedy, they're all helping hold each other up. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Saint-Roch-de-l'Achigan, Quebec.
He was such a man of dignity.
Former Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne paying tribute to her late colleague David Onley. Ontario's 28th Lieutenant Governor has died. Onley held the role from 2007 to 2014 and was the only person with a physical disability to hold the post. He was paralyzed from the waist down because of a childhood bout of polio. Onley championed accessibility issues throughout his life. Here's Kathleen Wynne again.
His advocacy for people with disabilities really, I think, was just it was just a model for everyone. He will be sorely missed.
In a statement this morning, Ontario Premier Doug Ford said he is deeply saddened by Onley's death, adding his unwavering commitment to public service will long be remembered and celebrated. Onley is survived by his wife and 3 sons. He was 72 years old. Invasive species threaten our biodiversity and can cost the Canadian economy billions of dollars. Once they've spread in the ecosystem, they are difficult to eradicate. The CBC's Ainsley McClellan now with a story about a researcher in Montreal who was using cutting-edge technology to help detect one particular trespasser.
Moving to start point.
A machine on a mission. A drone takes off and carves a path through the sky above a clearing in the Parc National des Îles de Boucherville, a Quebec provincial park on a chain of islands in the St. Lawrence River near Montreal. Biology researcher Antoine Caronguay follows the drone's progress on the monitor as it snaps photo after photo of the field below, on the hunt for an invasive plant that's threatening plant and animal life in the park, the common reed.
The common reed is a really aggressive invasive alien species. When it arrives, almost all the indigenous biodiversity, it replaces it.
Originally from Europe, the common reed is now so common to North America's wetlands, fields, and roadside ditches that many Canadians might not even realize it's invasive.
This is it? See, this is all common reed.
Wow. It's everywhere.
Yeah, really.
It's taken over large areas of the park, growing in thick beds, sometimes more than 3 meters tall. So dense you can get lost in them, Caronguay says. The islands, once fully forested, were cleared for agricultural land before the park was eventually inaugurated in the 1980s. As conservation officials try to reforest the park, the common reed is muscling out young indigenous trees. On top of that, says Sophie Tessier, the coordinator of the park's conservation and education service, animals just don't like it.
Whenever the common reed grows in one place and tend to be invasive, the animals just disappear from that place. You won't have many birds nesting in that area. You won't have any micro mammals or bigger mammals eating that.
And it's a tough plant to get rid of. It reproduces easily from a stem or rhizome, meaning plants have to be painstakingly ripped out from root to bud, or the ground covered with tarps for years.
This will slow them down, but yeah, it's like a daily effort almost.
If eradicating the reed altogether seems out of reach, the hope is that it can at least be contained. Enter the drone. Caronguay used images gathered this summer in the park to teach an AI program to identify young common reed plants from above with about 90% accuracy. He hopes if park officials can more quickly identify where the young plants are trying to pop up, they can snuff them out before they can take hold. It's a technology with a lot of potential in the fight against invasive species, according to Étienne Laliberté, biology professor at Université de Montréal.
I'm thinking, for example, water chestnut, which is an aquatic plant that is taking over rivers and lakes. And so I think this technology will have other applications, and this is sort of the first steps.
Caronguay doesn't believe his research will change the world, but he hopes, at least, it could change this place for the better.
I hope that someday, in a few years, I could come here and see that there's a place, there is no common reed, and there's le petit blongeau, une espèce d'oiseau.
There's a bird, he says, le petit blongeau, the least bittern in English. It's lost its natural habitat because of the common reed. Seeing that bird return to the park would be magical, he says, a sign that his work had made a difference. Ainsley McClellan, CBC News on les îles de Boucherville, Quebec.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. Canadian women have won gold at the Under-18 Hockey World Championships. It's a back-to-back win for Canada and the 7th time it's won the competition. The team defeated hosts Sweden 10-0 in the final. Earlier today, the United States beat Finland to take 3rd place. The Australian Open tennis tournament is getting underway in Melbourne. It's already a very different tournament from last year with one very obvious addition. It's not sports journalist Ed Kleiman, but Ed did join us to talk about it. Ed, of course we mean Novak Djokovic. After all of last year's controversy over his unvaccinated status, ultimately getting deported from the country, the Joker is back and chasing a 10th Oz Open crown. How's that looking?
I think he's an overwhelming favorite to win that 10th title. He comes into this in great form. He won the ATP finals at the end of last year, picked up where he left off with a win at the warm-up tournament in Adelaide. The only thing I think that people are looking at with him that might slow him down a bit is a question mark around his hamstring, but he has a dream draw. And I think if you look at Novak Djokovic playing his best tennis, I don't see anyone beating him but himself. So keep an eye on him. He's a big favorite for a reason.
Yeah, and the tournament officials also making sure that he's treated respectfully while he's there, saying they're going to kick out any fans who taunt him. But I want to look at the Canadians. Last year, both Felix Auger-Aliassime and Denis Shapovalov both made it to the quarterfinals. They lost then to Daniil Medvedev and Rafael Nadal, respectively. Of course, those two ended up in the final, which Nadal won. All of that to say, our Canadians did well last year. Who's there this time around?
Yeah, well, we do have Felix and Denis back. And I think after that Australian Open, very different years for Felix and Denis. Denis was struggling with consistency and confidence and really couldn't put it all together, it seemed, on a week-to-week basis. So he's looking to turn things around this year. If he can get back to the quarterfinals again at this tournament, he'd be thrilled. And he's actually got a pretty decent draw, and he made it to the quarterfinals in Adelaide, where he lost to Djokovic coming in. So I do like what I'm seeing from Denis. Felix last fall was just the player on tour who was the hottest out there. He had wins over Carlos Alcaraz just after he had become number one. He's one of only a couple of players to beat Djokovic last fall. He beat Nadal at the year-end finals. He won 3 tournaments, went on a 16-match winning streak. He led Canada to the Davis Cup. He kind of did it all. He's got kind of good news, bad news in his first round against Vasek Pospisil, his teammate that helped Canada get the Davis Cup. But I think as unfortunate as that is for Canadian fans, as draws go, for Felix, it's a really comfortable matchup. So that should be able to get him going, get his confidence up there. And it's fair to expect Felix to really have a big year on tour this year.
And what about the Canadian women as well? Because there's some in there too.
Oh, absolutely. The two leading women players, we've got Bianca Andreescu and Leylah Fernandez. I think both in a similar situation right now, both ranked sort of between 40 and 50, and that's way lower than their talent level and basically what they've proven in past performance. So much like Denis Shapovalov, it's about consistency and confidence. So at this tournament, can both of them kind of get something going to get their year jump started? I think it's going to be interesting to see what both those players do this season, because I do think we can expect them to have their moments. A couple other women to keep your eye on as well. Rebecca Marino, since she's come out of retirement, she's done nothing but improve and improve. She's in her early 30s now. She could, get a win here, maybe even 2 wins, and work her way toward the top 50. That would be really interesting. And really, the Canadian story that I think is just the best news is a player that nobody, I don't think, outside of real tennis hardcore fans have heard of, Catherine Seabov. She is ranked just inside the top 200, but really in qualifying was on fire, got into the main draw. She's now made more money by making it into the Australian Open than she's made, in 5 years playing the minor league circuit.
Oh, wow.
She's got a really brutal draw, though. She's got one of the tournament favorites, Caroline Garcia, in the first round, but so exciting for her. So I think that's a player that hopefully we'll be hearing more from in this year as well.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Thanks for having me on.
That's sports journalist Ed Kleiman.
You used to call me on my cell phone.
Forget a cell phone. If you're Gen Z and calling anyone, you might be doing it on a flip. Yes, along with most things Y2K, flip phones are a growing trend. A strangely thrilling one to those of us who actually came of age at a time when the Motorola Razr was the pinnacle of cool. While there are definitely drawbacks to being less connected, the youth of today are making a pretty good argument for bringing back that simpler time, if only for nights out. Here's an 18-year-old on TikTok explaining why.
We realize that every single problem that we have on a night out, everything that leads to us crying, everything that leads to us having a bad hookup, everything that leads to us having a bad time, stems from our phone while we're out. It eliminates all of the bad things about college and brings all of the good things about a phone, which is like connecting with people and taking photos and videos. Like the photos and videos on this are fire.
Among celebrities, the flip phone trend has come and gone over the years. Rihanna's been spotted with one, Vogue's Anna Wintour has been devoted to hers. Today's young stars are loudly proclaiming their love. Camila Cabello has posted on socials saying, "I'm team flip phone revolution. Maybe I can write the theme song, guys." While you're at it, Camila, do you also want to design a ringtone? Because some of these old ones aren't gonna cut it. So while we wait on Camila, we'll leave you with another one of our favorite retro songs about the art of the call. been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.